Yeah, it does. We are live.
Welcome to Lost Cryptids Conservatory. I'm Dave. I'll be one of the co-hosts for tonight. Chad will be as well, and also Blake will be popping in and out for the show. Our guest today is Steve Ward. Steve is an accomplished crypto researcher. He has been all over the world. He has particular expertise with Mothman and goes to the Mothman Festival every year and does tours, which is really cool. Goes to the TNT bunkers, and he has been with the Mothman phenomena since it had begun. Can you tell us, Steve, how you got involved with Mothman and how that all began for you?
Well, it started out for me. We were talking a little bit off air that you're an experiencer, but I never was. And a friend of mine years ago introduced me to the books of Frank Edwards. I don't know if you ever saw any of his old anthologies, Stranger Than Science, Strangest of All. And that's where I first read about the Flatwoods Monster and the Kelly Hopkinsville Goblins and so forth. He also had stories in there about moving coffins, which I didn't care for at all. I just kind of avoided that. But he became very well known. He was a newscaster, but he became very well known in the 60s when around March 1966 in Michigan, we had this big wave of UFO reports. And those are the ones that Dr. J. Allen Hynek, when he was still attached with Blue Book, suggested that some of them might be swamp gas. And of course, it was solved. You know, the newspaper people just rushed to their phones, called in their story, and that was it. But a little bit, it was around that time that he wrote a book called Flying Saucers, Serious Business. And that was a big seller. Some of his stories, I think, might have been a little bit colored up, but nonetheless, he kind of, hit that wave just at the right time. That was March of 1966. The following November was the first major sighting of the Mothman. And even before they had dubbed the name Mothman, there was this, it hit the wire services all over the world. Two couples were chased down Route 62, a 2-lane highway just north of Point Pleasant. And just like you mentioned, the TNT area, they had seen some kind of a sort of a man-like creature with wings and red glowing eyes that chased their car down Route 62. And I remember that, as a kid. And I was in junior high at the time, so I wasn't really able to go out and play UFO investigator. But it was pretty cool to have virtually have aliens landing in your backyard pretty much in March of 66 and watching all that in the newspaper. And it wasn't, in that same era is when the Betty and Barney Hill case became well known. Mm-hmm. It was covered in Look magazine, a slick publication, and even treated seriously by some people, some in the media. So it was a great time to be alive and to be interested in this stuff. I mean, I was the guy that went to my local library in town finding any kind of UFO book I could, which included, some of the old contactee books, which might have been a little bit sketchy, George Adamski and so forth. But there was Morris K. Jessup's The Case for the UFO. Trying to remember what else. There was some of the old classics. Some of Major Kehoe's stuff was there too. So. And then, of course, in the 70s, boy, that was a great time to be alive because you had all kinds of publications and so forth.
The Fire in the Sky guy, wasn't that in the 70s?
Yes, about 75, I think.
Travis Walton.
Yes, and you know what that was first covered was in the National Enquirer. And in those days, the Enquirer actually did some pretty good reporting on UFOs. There was a guy, Bob Pratt, was the reporter for the Enquirer. And I saw him, he was in the audience in 1976, 10 years after the swamp gas fiasco. It was the MUFON Symposium in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Dr. Hynek was speaking there, 10 years after the event.
Michigan, how ironic, man.
Yes.
Where we are.
And
we're here in Ann Arbor.
Yes.
Right now.
Well, in fact, the Bigfoot conference coming up in July at the Wyndham. Yep.
Wyndham Gardens.
I think, this was held at the Weber Inn, which I think might still be right next to it or right in that area.
It's right there. It's just a much smaller venue.
Across the way there, yeah.
And the name of his talk, Hynek's talk, was Swamp Gas Plus 10 and Counting. So it was really great to see him. There were some other really great UFO people there, but so it was just a great time, especially for somebody that I guess I came into it from my interest with science fiction and that sort of thing. And I know so many people are in this one way or the other because they've had some kind of an experience. But I mentioned I had one really kind of strange experience, actually in the Point Pleasant area, but that's about it. I'm not a repeater, and I'm not an experiencer per se.
What drives your interest in this topic? Then, I mean, you don't have experiences at all? You're just
the one time I was the TNT area we mentioned before was they created munitions for the World War II effort.
Right.
And they stored them in these concrete bunkers they call igloos. And they were covered with grass and foliage and everything so that if the enemy flew over, it would just look like terrain. And it was quite a complex. If you look at the old photographs back in the 40s, it was just an amazing complex. But even by 66, when the Mothman was first really seen, it was all overgrown. There was the old North Power Plant was still there, but it was a ruin. So that was it was pretty desolate place even back then. Now it's one of the creepiest places you can imagine, especially at night when we do the tours for the festival. But even in the daytime, it's pretty creepy. Well, one night I decided that I wanted to see if I had the intestinal fortitude to go in there alone. And so I did. I went down Igloo Road number 7. Now, the locals go out there all the time and it's no big deal. But so I went down Igloo Road number 7 and went into the second igloo, which is one of the ones where people seem to get a lot of EVPs and so forth. And that's all I did. I had my recorder going. I looked like a real paranormal investigator. And I went back, and as I'm driving back down Route 62, I experienced a couple flashes of light. And I thought, that's weird. And it may have been something very mundane, but I was so unprepared for this, I didn't even try to see what part of the road was this, so I could go back the next day to see if I could explain it somehow. And so I went back to my motel room, which is across the river in Gallipolis, Ohio, which was the other side of the Silver Bridge, by the way, when that collapsed back in '67. And I opened the door to my motel room. The TV set is just turning on and then flipping through stations steadily. And I thought, okay, no, this doesn't happen to me. This happens to other people, maybe. So that was it. That was my one weird experience.
Hey, I got a question for you, Steve.
Yeah.
Okay. You are one of the most foremost people that are familiar with Dogman from all of your studies. In your opinion, do you believe that they're an apparition, they're demonic, they're alien, or are they a physical being that's here?
Um, it seems that of course, Linda Godfrey is the
Mm-hmm.
foremost person on the Dog Man, and her work is exceptional. And of course, she's covered all kinds of other cryptids. It seems that these things. Now, I'm a student of John Keel, and John Keel, of course, was the one that wrote the Mothman Prophecies. And the book, by the way, that changed my thinking years ago was UFOs Operation Trojan Horse by John Keel. And that's where he starts to see that it makes the case that all these things are linked together: UFOs, cryptids, uh, weird electronic phenomena, poltergeist phenomena, that sort of thing. Uh, and he makes it. He used a term as kind of a literary device. He called it ultra terrestrial, to try and come to grips with some of these entities we experience. He wasn't convinced they were from off world or whatever, but he thought they were a natural condition of the planet. Well, I think there are some clues. Linda Godfrey, one time, almost by accident, she was looking at I've got the book here. Can't remember the name of it, but it has to do with mounds in southern Wisconsin. She was looking at the mounds, the map of the mounds, and then looking at the clusters of Dogman reports in that area. And when she overlaid them, they were almost identical over the specific mounds, like the Panther mounds and the Water Spirit mounds. The Panther mounds are kind of if you were to draw a very simplistic animal, with the head and the legs at the bottom and a short tail. The Water Spirit mounds are smaller, but they have a long pointed tail. And anyway, at any rate, for some bizarre reason, these things seem to match up. And I think there's a Native American tradition about some of these entities guarding certain mounds. That tradition goes back a ways. Yet, on the other hand, there seems to be a certain physicality to some of these things. And and we have to be very careful, I think, when we use the term interdimensional, because people we have to define that term. Do they mean it's a flesh and blood creature that somehow slides into another reality? Or is it something that, it's almost like Ron Moorhead, the great Bigfoot researcher. His more recent book is Quantum Bigfoot. And he, with his experiences, he came to believe that these things, if I understand them correctly, sort of phase in and phase out using, the principles of quantum physics. So that's not much of an answer. It seems like there's always a paradox with some of these things. There's a certain physicality. They'll leave tracks, hair samples, but then they don't necessarily act like real flesh and blood creatures, and they're so elusive.
They'll eat feces. They'll take gifts. They take my apples. They'll rip bags open and stuff. They've built stuff. I mean, it's so to believe that they're like living in a parallel that isn't in our dimension. It's like, to me, it's crazy from what I experience.
Right. Well, there's almost like two categories. If you look at the research of Stan Gordon and the wave of reports it was like a 6 square mile area, predominantly around Chestnut Ridge in southwestern Pennsylvania, 73, 74. These were some really bizarre Bigfoot reports, and they were seen in conjunction with apparently UFOs and strange lights in the sky. Some of them had green glowing eyes. Several of them were shot at point blank, and some of them disappeared in a hail of sparks. Others didn't seem to be affected at all. A lot of these seem to have 3-toed footprint. On the other hand, you go out in the Northwest and even Ohio and some other states, it's a whole kind of different animal, no pun intended. It does seem like we're dealing with, it seems like to me there's more than one answer to some of these things. Keel even gave the possibility. He called something called paranormal mimicry. And the idea is perhaps we have some real nuts and bolts UFOs. We have real unknown animals out there that remain hidden. but there's this aspect in human consciousness or whatever that mimics these things in a paranormal sense, and so that some of these things really are truly more like apparitions and could explain some of the behavior and some of the things that just don't fit, whereas other ones are true flesh and blood physical beings or entities.
Now, the Native Americans believe that, or it's put out there in lore anyway, that if enough people believe that something exists, that it can be willed into existence. What's your thought on
Well, that's also the Tibetan tulpa. Alexandria David Neal wrote a book called Magic and Mystery in Tibet. And supposedly she learned from the Tibetans how to create one of these thought forms. And then supposedly she did just that. We have the sort of lore, if you will, of the Slender Man and how that started out as an internet hoax, and some people believe that it became a reality to some extent. And so I think that, and then, we can go to the work of Carl Jung, who wrote Flying Saucers, a myth of things seen in the sky. He talked about the circle, the mandala, and so forth, and symbolizing, something positive in human consciousness. So I think that there is an aspect to that, because if you look at the history, for example, of strange lights in the sky, if you go back far enough, they used to call these lights dragon tracks. At one time, if you saw a light in the sky, it was a witch riding on her broom carrying a lantern, or it was the fairies and fairy lights. People still believe that they see those today. And then in later years, we had the airship wave in 1897 and other times, where sometimes people would only see the light moving in the sky and not necessarily a craft or whatever. And then you had the Foo Fighters and on and on. So in fact, at one time, John Keel's thinking wasn't static. He thought perhaps that some of these were the only reality of some of these sightings were the strange meandering lights, and that perhaps people were being programmed or affected somehow, where one person would see a hairy, shambling monster walk off into the woods. Another person might see a giant UFO overhead. So he began to believe that the image, the projection, wasn't the important thing. He didn't care if the UFO had a dome on it or several lights. He thought that perhaps these, things were, and that's where he got the term ultra-terrestrial, just to kind of try to deal with the aspect of something. He believed it was real, and in some cases they were making real physical effects on the environment. But he just thought it was some kind of a natural condition of the planet that has always been with us.
Like power of suggestion, Steve. I mean, isn't this an important thing we have to think about? Because a lot of people really have stuff happen to them.
Oh, sure.
Some people that have, if you have Bigfoot on your brain and you're in the woods and you hear a branch snap, I mean, the power of suggestion is so strong that you can misinterpret things from what they really are, and that can go with all the paranormal.
Well, there's the aspects of Ron Moorhead, for example. They were constantly having batteries drained. They would have batteries that were charged up. They were trying to get more of those great recordings or even a photograph. And the same thing was happening with the Loch Ness creature. It's very similar to people that do classic ghost investigation, where their batteries are drained and so forth. There's a classic case in the mid-'60s, I think. W.D. Doc Priestley, he's cruising along a two-lane in West Virginia near Marlington. And he's following a busload of his buddies that are going somewhere. And all of a sudden his car stalls and rolls to a stop. And he looks up, and off to his left is a classic Bigfoot standing there. And its hair is kind of standing on end a little bit. And then he thinks, what the heck is this? Well, his buddies realize he's not behind him anymore. They turn around, they're coming back, the Bigfoot recedes into the woods and his car starts again. So he starts up and doesn't get very far after they get going. He doesn't tell his buddies yet what's going on, what he saw. And he gets a little bit further. The car starts chugging and sparking. His engine burns out. And this thing, or his kissing cousin, is standing right there by the road. There's other reports of close encounters of cryptids that seem to have some kind of interface with the engine, with an engine or draining batteries or whatever. It's similar, perhaps, to a close encounter with a UFO. We've heard many cases where the craft comes in close to a car. It seems to affect the combustion engine somehow, and it stalls. But there's even a case in the again the mid '60s in England. I can't remember the place, Northampton, I think, where a lady, Dorothy Strong, she's in a taxi cab. They're going along, and this phantom army starts to manifest, or at least it wasn't physical, but you could see this phantom army, and they had seen this before. Phantom armies are not are seen occasionally in England. And this one, they knew from the type of the uniforms that it was from the Battle of Otterburn from 1388. And these things, they disappeared, they went away, and the taxi cab started again. This is one of the things that I look for. There seem to be patterns and parallels in what we think of as different types of phenomena, and which kind of begins to bring them together. And so I think that there's people talk about some of the stranger aspects of Bigfoot, the infrasound idea or whatever. But I think there's
which I believe is electromagnetic frequency.
It could be, but I think there's in some of the cases with Bigfoot and other cryptids, there seems to be a very high strangeness aspect connected to them. But again, I've learned a long time ago not to pigeonhole something, not to. There's certainly more than one answer to so many of these things, and I think what we have to do is listen to the reports of the witnesses. And I was reading Tom Powell, another Bigfoot researcher that wrote The Locals. He was talking about how relieved some of the people were when they found out that other people were experiencing some of the high strangeness aspects, because it can be intimidating enough if you've seen a Bigfoot to report that. But boy, if it's accompanied by an orb or strange light or other phenomena, it can really be intimidating to somebody and keep them from actually reporting it.
So, have you ever gone out researching and trying to find Bigfoot, Steve?
Yeah, I've been out a few times. I was out with some people that from Pennsylvania that have went to an area where they've there have been sightings and there have been sounds. Now, I may be a jinx. I may be the guy that that turns off the switch just by being there. But I haven't done a lot of research like that. A friend of mine spent a lot of time out in the Chestnut Ridge area, but we didn't see anything.
So, what is your favorite cryptid?
I guess it's got to be the Mothman, because it's so Mothman is so full of paradoxes that it doesn't make any sense. Yet Keel documented about a little over 100 people between roughly November 1966 to December 67 that saw this thing, and it was basically not always, but basically they got the same description: about 6 or 7 feet tall, kind of man-like, 10-foot wingspan, bat-like wings. The red glowing eyes, man, were really a focus. But the thing is that it doesn't make sense biologically. If you're going to have something that big, you really kind of need a bigger wingspan. This thing was seen taking off sometimes. It didn't always flap its wings, and it would sometimes it would put its wings behind it. Okay, and then take off straight up like a helicopter. Yet people, now there were exceptions. Tom Urey saw something more like a thunderbird, a large bird. He couldn't identify it, about 10, 12-foot wingspan. If you go back far enough, back around World War One, around the Kanawha Valley, which is kind of all connects with the Ohio River and so forth, people were seeing some kind of a reddish feathered man-like bird, about 12-foot wingspan, and nothing. They never saw it had any close sightings or whatever. But according to Haunted Valley, I think, is a book on folklore of that area. And again, that goes back to about World War One. There's also a bridge collapse that happened around that time, before that time, on the same day that the Silver Bridge collapsed, December 15th. But the number of years is kind of odd, and there may not be any connection at all. But another thing about the Mothman, Keel and other researchers that followed him found out that many of the people that had a close-up sighting of this thing would have an outbreak of poltergeist phenomena after they got home. Now, how do you explain that? What the heck is that all about?
That, like my theory, the Mothman is not a physical thing. It's an apparition. It's a demonic or a spirit thing, and that's what it is. It's not real. It manifests. It demanifests. That's why it's not reported. It's reported. There's other reports of people seeing this thing before disasters in other countries.
That's now. Some people believe it was a harbinger. I'm a little skeptical, but you'll find people that believe that definitely that it was a harbinger. Other people think it was responsible for the bridge collapse, and I don't really. But
a lot of people believe it was there to warn. See,
yes,
there's a whole other thing. I mean, this is it evil, demonic, and then the people are saying no, it's there to tell you something bad's about to happen.
The thing is,
there's no reports of it killing people. All these people that were traumatized by it were just chased by it and scared of it. Right. They lived.
The thing is, I wish that if it was a harbinger or like a banshee, would you please tell us, say, hey, the bridge is going to collapse. Don't just scare the crap out of us and have us try to guess what's going to happen, because actually, that's interesting. You mentioned that because Mary Heyer, who was the local reporter for the Athens Messenger that worked with John Keel and showed him around and introduced him to people, she and actually another Mothman witness, they were having dreams of packages, like Christmas packages floating in the water. And that came to pass when the bridge collapsed, because it was December 15th, while people were doing their Christmas shopping. There was a real feeling of foreboding. And the other thing is that John Keel was in contact with several individuals that firmly believed that they were in contact with some kind of an alien or some kind of source of information that would give them prophecies. That's where the Mothman prophecies comes from. And some of these prophecies would come true, okay? And there was something, they were talking about something which turned out to be nonsense, but they called it an EM effect. It was going to come, and eventually they found out, or at least all these people were telling Keel that it would occur on December 15th, and he was blindsided. He thought for sure it was going to be one of these factories blowing up or something like that. He had when the bridge collapsed, it just caught everybody by surprise. But there were these prophecies that were coming up that something really terrible was going to happen.
Yeah, the reason the bridge collapsed was because there was a traffic jam and the bridge filled up with too many cars at one time sitting on it, correct?
Well, that was an aspect of it. The lights would take forever to change, and it was again rush hour traffic, Christmas shopping. It was filled, and the bridge was built in the 20s, early 20s maybe. It wasn't really designed for the traffic for the 1960s, and they determined it was the 13th eye bar that had a defect, and that's what gave loose. And I don't know if you saw the film where, Richard Gere has all kinds of time to try and warn people. In reality, the bridge took about 30 to 40 seconds to collapse. It went from the Ohio side to the West Virginia side like a series of dominoes. I talked to a survivor of that bridge on the 50th anniversary of the bridge collapse. They had a remembrance ceremony in Point Pleasant, downtown Point Pleasant. And I met him. The gentleman's name was Bill Edmondson, and he was 88. So that meant he was 38 when he was crossing the bridge in his rig, his big rig. He was hauling some kind of material, a material used in the development of tires. He was going to some tire plant in Detroit. So he's going from the West Virginia side to the Ohio side. And he said all of a sudden that the bridge it was like it started to wobble. And then it tilted so far that he was holding onto his steering wheel to keep from ramming into the side door, the passenger door. And then everything gave way and he hit the water. Well, he was actually thrown through the windshield, right arm first. And to this day, he had a pin in his arm because he couldn't quite move it all the way. So he went to the bottom of the river, and with good news and bad news. The good news is he came through the window, and he was free. The bad news is what I call the curse of the 1960s pant cuffs. They were so tight that you had to take your shoes off. Well, his pants had been pulled down. They were dragging behind him. So as the currents are bringing him up to the surface, some of the debris from the bridge or whatever catches his pants and starts to pull him back under. Finally, now remember, this is almost sundown. It's 22 degrees out. This water's got to be just brutal. And but he gets free again, comes to the surface. His right arm is useless. He sees some of the material floating on the water that he was actually transporting in the truck. There's a rip in the side, thank God. He puts his left arm in to stay buoyant. And he said he looked up and there's this bird perched on the top of it. He figured that she had her nest underneath the bridge, and she was just as confused as he was as to what happened. And what happened was, fortunately, everybody kind of mobilized, and boats were picking up people all over the place, and some people, of course, they couldn't save. 46 people lost their lives that day. There was a tugboat captain apparently that saw him, and he maneuvered the tugboat to catch him from going downriver, and they pulled him up out of the water probably moments before he would have died of hypothermia. And of course, they rushed him. There's in the Mothman Museum, they've got an article with him and some other people that were pulled up out of the river. And of course, he told us that they put heat on him, and he was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And so he was just lucky to be alive. And he had come down there a few years ago, and it would be 2017. To pay his respects to those that had lost their lives. So, that was, I have never talked to anybody one-on-one that had an experience like that. Certainly we've all seen stories on TV all the time of survival, but that was just amazing. He was quite a guy.
It sounds like it. So now Steve, so we have something coming up here in July?
Yes, I think, is it the 7th? Let's see. I think I've got the date here somewhere.
17th?
Yeah, 17th.
Mm-hmm.
At the Wyndham Gardens in Ann Arbor.
Yep. You're going to be here, right?
Well, yeah.
you're going to speak and
yes.
Take questions. And you're also going to have a vendor table, correct? And
right.
Have information and product.
Oh, sure.
Whatever. Yeah. All right. So you all know that. Now, what's going to be your main focus point when you come? Do you have one yet? Or
well, it's I'm working. It's certainly it's a Bigfoot conference, so I do want to deal with all aspects of it.
We have two different areas. You'll be able to speak in the Bigfoot, but there's also an area to speak about other things.
Okay.
Where there's going to be the people that talk about the woo, where there's going to be people that talk about ghosts. There's going to be people that talk about all the other cryptids. It's going to go on at the same time. The venue is very large, and we've rented it. So,
all right. Well, I'll probably be talking about the weird stuff. You'll have to stick me in the weird section.
The weird stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, it's endlessly fascinating. I mean, my main focus is looking for patterns, and it's not even trying. You don't even have to try to find them. They just present themselves in so many different areas. I mean, there's even weird connections with Bigfoot and Men in Black, Loch Ness and Men in Black,
aliens and Bigfoot,
yes,
aliens and Men in Black. You're right, man. There's correlations with all of it.
There was a classic case. There was a Swedish researcher, a journalist, that was in Loch Ness in the mid-'70s, and he got Foyers is about halfway down the loch. Now he got kind of lost, turned around in the woods there for a moment, and he came out to a clearing, and he sees this sort of this craft or whatever it is. He's assuming is a submersible, and some guys that he thinks are in diver suits, but they're not. It's apparently they're like there's some kind of an entity. I mean, it's a close encounter of the third kind.
Like mermaids or something.
No, like that would be probably more fun, but. They were looked like they were aliens in some kind of suit, and they get in this thing, and instead of going off to the river, the water, the lake, it takes off. I think, what the heck is this? He goes back to Sweden, and apparently we know this because he corresponded with John Keel for a while. He started to become plagued by a man in black when he was in Sweden. We don't have any details about that. F.W. Holliday, who a great researcher. Of course, we long ago we lost him, but he wrote a book called The Great Orm, O-R-M, which simply means worm, like an ancient word for worm, of Loch Ness, the Orm of Loch Ness. And he talks about the history of the water horse, and they believe that the Kelpie was a shapeshifter and evil and all that sort of thing. Well, he believed that the plesiosaur model didn't work at all. So from the descriptions, he thought it was kind of an oversized mollusk for a while. And he even saw this. He had a couple sightings of it, but it was like the hoodoo or whatever, people that try and take a photograph of Bigfoot sometimes, or a ghost, or Nessie. The camera jams, or Nessie submerges just before you can get that picture. There was a classic, they had cameras on one side of the loch, sort of triangulating, and Nessie shows up in exactly the area and steaming back and forth right where both cameras miss her. That happened one time. And then he started chronicling all kinds of UFO reports, and there were people were getting some kind of ailments sometimes when they were researching Nessie by the loch. And later on, he did some research and found that there was if you go back to the old carvings, I don't know how far they date back, but they have the circle or the mandala right next to the serpent. He began to believe that it was the serpent. The serpent symbolized evil, and that the circle symbolized good. He called it the disc culture, and also he did research into other lakes, like in Ireland and so forth. You'll find that there are many lakes, and even in Scotland, Loch Morar has its own little resident called Morag. And oftentimes people will see this thing, the same kind of thing, kind of the long neck and the humps or whatever, and they're credible people. But these lakes are so small; they don't have a large enough fish population to house even one of these things, much less a colony.
We get this right here in North America. There are lake monsters. I mean,
It just almost everybody's got a lake monster, you know. So
What-
he began. Well, he
a
began to think that,
salamander like living
Yeah.
underground and breathing with their head up, and they're buried under there, and they just lay there, and maybe
Well,
they slowly digest food, so they feast, and then
who
they
knows?
just bury for
But he just began to think that maybe something else was going on. Also, people would, somebody reported a kind of a large frog-like creature one time sitting on a rock. Other people were seeing something that looked like a crocodile with tusks. So, you know, how many oddities are in Loch Ness anyway? So he began to think that maybe there was something more paraphysical to this. And so then here's the Dr. Donald Ormond. He was some kind of a priest. He wrote a book on exorcism, and he mentions in there something about he thought Loch Ness was not a real creature. So Holliday became interested. They became acquainted. And this guy, Dr. Donald Ormond, was convinced that that Nessie was evil. And he was going to perform an exorcism on the loch. Okay. So his idea was he had this exorcism ceremony. He was going to go to the four corners of the loch, into the center of the loch, and do this ceremony. Well, Holliday was an agnostic. So he said, okay, I'll go along with it. You know, I don't know that I believe this or not. And even the BBC was there. This is low tech, by the way. They borrowed a boat from Mr. and Mrs. Carey, who lives on the loch. Mr. Carey was a RAF pilot. And so the BBC covered it, you know, for a lark and had a good laugh. And afterwards, when they came back, Holliday feels drained. It's like, you know, he doesn't really believe there's much to this, but he just feels awful. And so he's sitting in with the Careys in their house. And all of a sudden, he and Mrs. Carey hear this horrible vibration, thunder. They look out, they see a tornado, something that looks like a tornado about 8 feet tall, swirling. Mrs. Carey sees a beam of light come through the window, strike F.W. Holliday, Ted Holliday, in the forehead, right where the holy water was placed, supposedly. And now he doesn't see that or feel that. Mr. Carey got his back turned to them. He doesn't see, hear, or feel anything. This guy's mixing a drink. So maybe he had enough drinks where he wasn't going to feel anything anyway. He was the smart one there. And then everything stops. That was it. It's like they had no idea what that was, how to explain it. The next day, Holliday is standing at the edge of the loch, and he looks over and he sees a man in black. And this doesn't look like, it looks almost like, you know, one of these two-dimensional black figures you see when you pass on the road. You know, it didn't look like it had any substance to it. And of course, he does the double take. I mean, he's thinking about what happened yesterday, and now what's going on? Am I seeing things? So he walks up to it kind of nonchalantly, trying to see if he can touch it or whatever before it vanishes. And of course, he hears a pop, and there's nothing there. And if it was a real person, he would have seen it get to the road. There's no way somebody could have escaped. 1 year later, Holliday has a heart attack almost on the same spot where he saw this apparition of a man in black. Now, what to make of this, I don't know. He survived it, but it just seems like, and you can probably think of examples yourself. There are so many of these situations where the high strangeness aspect is there, but it's very hard to explain what is really going on.
I have a thing where, hey, I can't prove it's true or not, but there are a lot of people that have heart attacks in the woods while they're out hunting. And it makes me wonder if it isn't the EMF that's emitted from these types of creatures out there that, I mean, it could cause death if you're in bad health or if you get hit too hard, in my opinion. Now, can I prove that? No. But I really think that it's a high possibility.
Well, it's very hard, you know, I mean, we're kind of on the speculation train here. It's very difficult to be dogmatic about these things. And it's very, I mean, I'm not going to say I can prove any of this. I just look at the way the patterns come together. We talked a little bit earlier about the folklore connection. And right now I'm reading Joshua Kuchin and Timothy Renner have written a couple books. Where the Footsteps End, I think it's called, Volume 1 and 2, and they connect Bigfoot to folklore and so forth. And and even you get into the some of the David Paulides stuff, the missing 411 stuff, and even that seems to parallel to when you get into folklore and so forth. One of my favorite encounters. Are you guys familiar with Joe Symington from southern Wisconsin and the cosmic pancakes from outer space?
No,
Okay,
tell us.
That's a trip. That's a trip. Let's see, April 1966, or is it 61? I can't remember. Joe Symington. He's Eagle River, Wisconsin. He is a plumber by trade and a chicken farmer by day. He's cleaning up his breakfast dishes, and he hears this horrible racket. And he looks outside, and he sees a kind of a classic UFO, kind of the dome, the bowl on the top and the bowl on the bottom. And he goes outside, and there's a door that's open. When he looks inside, he sees what looks like people are in there, so it doesn't look too frightening. And he approaches, and there are 3 or 4 entities in there, human-looking, about 5 feet tall. They're wearing some kind of coverall and sort of like knit caps, okay? And one of them looks like there's kind of a open grill behind him. Looks like he's cooking pancakes or some kind of a cookie or something like that. So one of them hands him kind of a silver chalice, something that looks chrome, like the same color as their craft, and sort of indicates through sign language that they want water. This is like goes back to folklore, the leprechauns or the elementals, exchanging whatever for water. So he goes to his pump, fills it up, and he gives it back to him. And they give him in return, supposedly, 3 of these pancakes. And then they take off. And so Project Blue Book was around at the time. They investigated. Dr. Hynek investigated it. The local judge there said, who interviewed him, he knew that he said Joe's a very credible guy, and you can find video of this guy on YouTube. This crusty old guy. That they asked him. They said, "Hey, would you have taken a ride with these people?" He said, "No, the food tasted terrible." He said the pancakes tasted like cardboard. Well, for some reason, Blue Book took the pancakes and used taxpayers' money to examine their contents. Get to that in a moment. The local judge there interviewed Joe Symington, and he said, "Joe," kind of tongue in cheek, he said, "What do these guys look like? Little green men?" And he said, "No, Judge, they were kind of swarthy looking, like Italians." Now, I don't think Italy had a secret space force at the time, but here's where it gets even weirder. John Keel in Operation Trojan Horse talks about, the general, World War II General Spatz. He gave a news conference back in 1948, and for some reason he's talking about there's no truth to the rumor that Spaniards are driving flying saucers, or that they're landing in flying saucers. Keel had been getting a lot of reports at the time of some of the entities aboard the craft looking like, and the descriptions were not very sophisticated. People would say, well, they look kind of foreign, or they looked like sort of like dark foreign types. Again, not sophisticated, but perhaps swarthy like Italians or Spaniards. I don't know, but there's that strange thread there. And then also, when you get in some of the Men in Black lore, some of the Men in Black kind of fit that description. They might have sort of an Asian countenance, but dark skin or whatever. Seldom people could really say, well, they were this nationality or that nationality, but they were, but it's kind of the same thread was there. So then, if you go back to my contention is that if you look at this experience, if it happened 100 or 200 years ago, people would have said the fairies, the elementals came and visited Joe. Only even though they showed up in some kind of a metallic chariot. So if you go back to Evans Wentz, who wrote The Fairy Faith in Celtic Countries, he went around in around 1911, in the early 1900s, and interviewed people that had supposedly experiences with elementals. And they gave him, the reports as we do today about Bigfoot, UFOs, or whatever. These weren't just, reports handed down from their great grandfather. And here, one of the elements is that an Irishman told him that the fairies drink fresh water, they take fresh meat, and they never eat salt. When Blue Book examined these pancakes, they were like just earthly pancakes, except there was no sodium in them. Now, what does that mean? I don't know. But then, if you want to follow this thread further, with the water gathering, we have a whole history of UFOs landing on water, a hose going in. There was one in Ontario where they sucked the water up. There was one that Ingo Swann said he witnessed way up in the north, where this sort of a triangular craft literally sucked water up out of a lake. And then, if you want another example, if we go to about 1955, California, a couple of miners, and one of them was John Black. They're out doing their job, and over a month or so, every once in a while, they see kind of a classic UFO, flying saucer. Well, one time, John Black is in the woods, and he sees what he thinks is a little kid fishing, bending over a stream. And then he, when it gets closer, he says, "Uh-oh, this ain't a little kid," but it's a kind of a little entity, that the kind they used to see in the old days. And he had buckles on his tunic or whatever. He had some kind of a bucket or whatever that he got water with, and Black watched him go out of the woods, and he followed him outside through a clearing, and there's one of these craft landed there, and this little guy takes his bucket of water and climbs up the ladder into the UFO, somewhat similar to Symington did 10 years later. Again, I don't, any one of these reports could be fabricated, but on the other hand, who makes up if you're going to make up a story, why would you add these really bizarre elements? Aren't you going to try and make it sound a little more credible? So I just find it interesting that when you start at one point, you start to follow these threads and look at the entire literature, that all these things seem to come together. And especially when you get into fairy lore and modern day UFO experiences, there are many, many connections.
Are you an author, Steve?
I'm working on a book. I've written a couple of chapters in various books here and there. I'm working on a book on just that type of thing, where I'm looking at vehicle stoppages and from different aspects, crop circles, folklore, etc. So I'm interested in. I'm certainly not the first person to do this. Probably Keel was the first, and there's a lot of great researchers out there doing something similar. But I'm just fascinated by the connections and the patterns and the parallels that run through these things. And I expect it to be out in the next decade. So keep your eyes open.
All right. Do I get an autographed copy?
Absolutely. As soon as it comes
out.
Out.
Okay, you guys, 10 years from now. No, it won't be that long.
No, it won't be quite that long. But I just think that, and then, I've been able to talk to a couple people on my show. I do have a show called The High Strangeness Factor.
All right.
On Paranormal UK Radio.
Okay. Steve.
Yeah.
We're going to break off from our topic.
Okay.
Steve Ward, please tell us what you have, where people can find you, and all that. Because we're
Okay. You can find me on Facebook. Just if you type in Steve Ward and Battle Creek, you'll probably find me. And I do a show every 2 weeks, a podcast called The High Strangeness Factor, and you can find it on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. And I'm also a correspondent weekly on Mac Maloney's Military X-Files. So that's fun.
What's that about? Hey, tell us. Let's. What is this? The Military X-Files.
Well, Mac Maloney is an author. He's written a lot of Well, it's some kind. He wrote the Wingman series, which is very entertaining, and he's written many other series. Some of them are, war oriented or spy oriented, that kind of thing. And so I got in connection with him because I liked his writing, and he invited me on his show one time to talk about the Mothman, and then he had me come on as a correspondent, and I do kind of a fringe report every once in a while, just talking about a lot of the stuff that we have just talked about. And I've got quite a library here, so I try and come up with something that people haven't really heard about. And it's a you never know what we're going to talk about on the show. I mean, that last time we did stuff on music, he had one of the guys that was in both Yes and Kansas. So we talked about music and just everything. You just don't know. And sometimes it's very straight military, and sometimes it's we just have fun.
All right, you guys. Steve Ward. Follow him on Facebook. Follow his YouTube sites. And come on, Dave. I know you got some questions there. Are you frozen? I think Dave's frozen.
Technology strikes again.
I know, man. But hey, it worked tonight. So Steve, tell us a little more about your interests outside of the cryptid world. Let's get to know Steve.
Boy, what do I like? I guess I'm a soundtrack freak, film and TV soundtrack. I have been since I bought in the 60s. I bought an LP of Jerry Goldsmith's Planet of the Apes soundtrack, and I've been hooked ever since. So I have a pretty amazing a collection of that sort of thing. I still read science fiction. I love the old pulp magazines. I'm a pulp magazine collector. The old Shadow, Doc Savage, and some of the old science fiction magazines where Ray Bradbury and Edgar Rice Burroughs and Robert E. Howard first got their start. So,
you ever thought about going out in the field?
Well, I do occasionally. Yeah.
You ever thought about like taking a whole year of your life and saying, I'm going to have to do this every week, every weekend, as much as I can, because it's not easy to find a Bigfoot. I mean, do we find them? Yes, we find them in their areas, but it's not easy. We spend days searching and scouring, and then they move. And
my efforts are, my hat goes off to people that do that. My efforts are more into the books and the reports. I've got a collection I've amassed since the 60s. I've got a lot of publications that, people are not going to find this stuff on the internet. You can find a lot of stuff, but there's all kinds of things that are not available. So I think there's so much information to be found in just the stuff I have. And I'm always ordering stuff. I'm one of the worst people when I'm reading a book and they refer to another book, another source. I'm on Amazon trying to pull it in, get another one. So I think that I'm better served for my talents is looking at the literature and pulling that together. And I'll let some of the younger ones like you go out in the field.
I'm 51, dude.
I'm 68. You are a younger one.
There's somebody that you need to meet. His name, Val Zavala.
Okay.
I'll add you as a friend. I'll add you to his group. He is a data miner.
Oh,
he's
good.
A reader, and he organizes things forensically to try to build a profile. And he's a really good friend to the Lost Cryptids and to all of us involved. And I think you'll really like him and talk. You would have fun talking to him.
Oh, I bet I would.
He's very knowledgeable on more than just. Well, actually, he's not even a Bigfoot researcher. He's a data miner. He goes out in the field every now and then with us, But what he does is he takes reports and he takes the information and he puts them into categories to try to build a profile. And he's also a big reader too.
Well, that's what a lot of people have done. There's a researcher. Well, Albert Rosales has an incredible database of humanoid reports, and he's got 15 books out now currently. They start with 01 AD all the way up to 2015. And so he chronicles all kinds of that the subtitle are called humanoids, the others amongst us. And so it's just and so there have been other people like a gentleman named Ahmad Jamaluddin that have taken that data and seen what they could find patterns. And they found out that it focuses primarily on close encounters of the third kind, where people see some kind of a craft and they see some kind of an entity. He found out that they show up. I mean, that the best time to see them are certain times of the day, if there's a flap going on. And there's other times when they don't really show up much.
Unless you're an abductee. If you're an abductee, they show up when they want. It's
right. But it seems like most of the experiences happen between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. And the thing is, it's fixed as in different time zones, suggesting that the experience, the manifestation, the entry point is fixed as the world turns. So that's just bizarre that it's not exclusively, but primarily in that time period. He also found out that, again, using Albert Rosales' data, that he called them humanoid migrations. They will start somewhere in South America and then end up in North America somewhere, and then go across to either Europe or Asia, and then Malaysia, and then back to South America. And this is consistent in about 8 to 10 year cycles. Now, the thing is, the outbreak or the migration or whatever are in relatively small areas. I mean, there was a big flap in '73 in the U.S. I remember that. So it would be very hard to actually predict it. But it seems like that if we take the data, like you're talking about data mining, that we actually can come up with some answers. Now, still, it always, there's always more questions.
At least a theory to progress us forward with an idea to try to further affirm the theory. Welcome back, David.
Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Oh, wow, great.
I'm all talked out. I'm going to mute.
This is just amazing here. It's actually working. Now, in terms of your data matching up, as far as location, times, which is the most important for you?
You mean in the humanoid encounters, or?
Yes.
Well, they think that November seems to be the peak month. And that's also the time when people were warned to beware of the elementals, the fairies. And if you were out berry picking or in boulder fields, and that's the same kind of criteria that David Paulides talks about. Not saying that fairies or Bigfoot are taking these people, but again, you're getting these weird patterns. John Keel came up with the Wednesday phenomena. He found that during a given week that UFO sightings peaked on a Wednesday. Didn't make any sense. More people are out on weekends. Why don't you see them then? So it would kind of peak at Wednesday and kind of taper off. I think actually Wednesdays and sometimes Saturdays would be high points. So there are these patterns that show up, but it doesn't seem to make any sense. Another thing that again, I talk a lot about Keel, but he had a lot of catchphrases, and one of them was "ask the experiencer," essentially what they had for breakfast. Now, he didn't mean literally what they had for breakfast, but he said, find out all about them. Don't just ask them about the light they saw in the sky. Because what he found out was that people that would see these things were repeaters. Usually they would see more than one UFO. They might even have a cryptid experience. They might have haunting phenomena in their home, or electronic, their phones. They would get strange phone calls. They might even have strange visitors like Men in Black, or bedroom invaders, those shadowy apparitions that pop up. And there was a lady that contacted me in New Hampshire a few years ago, and she had had a missing time experience. And at that point, she had not made a breakthrough. So what happened was, she and her husband were standing out on the porch, and they lived near an airport near Londonderry, New Hampshire. And so they're very familiar with the lights that go overhead. But they saw some lights that didn't look quite right. And then all of a sudden, they noticed that while they were standing right next to each other, they're not standing next to each other anymore on the porch. And they look up and they see this giant black triangle so low it's touching the tops of the trees. And then, inexplicably, they looked at it and thought, well, that's interesting. And then they turned around and went back to bed. Later on, when they woke up, they thought, why weren't we more alert to the strange craft going over? And then they realized they were missing about 35 minutes. So I asked her a series of questions that John Keel would have. And the long story short, it turned out that they were experiencing classic haunting phenomena in their home. Both her sons were seeing orb phenomena. The youngest one was seeing sort of golden orbs dancing outside his window at night. The other one, the older one, saw one in the house come right up to him, circle him, and take off. She saw a shadow person. I don't know if you knew who Rosemary Ellen Guiley was, a great researcher that we lost a couple of years ago. She was investigating shadow people reports, and she found out that a significant percentage of people that had that experience were also experiencing what we would call classic alien abduction phenomena. Excuse me. So I asked this young lady, I said, have you ever seen something like an apparition or a shadow person? She says, well, yeah, I was at work one time, and this shadow person seemed to move along the wall. So blow for blow, they had electronic phenomena in their house. And then I said to her, this is going to sound like a weird question, but have you ever seen anything like a Bigfoot or some kind of an animal that seemed out of place? And she said, no. And then she said, well, wait a minute. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law, they both saw something near this property. And what they saw was something panther-like, but standing on two legs. And they thought it was seen twice in that area. So it turned out that she was a classic, what John Keel would call a classic experiencer of different types of phenomena. But if I would have been frozen in the 1960s when I just thought we were dealing with ET popping out a little, egg-shaped craft, I never would have thought to ask her all the other questions. They even had a black car. They lived at the end of a cul-de-sac, a dead end. They even had a black car with the windows blacked out, come down and circle and go back. And then later on, she made a breakthrough. She did have find out ostensibly what happened to her. Now, she's very very matter of fact about it. She's very, very rational about it. She said, look, I don't remember this consciously, but this is she had an experience that she repeated under hypnosis. So she doesn't know if it's real. She's not dogmatic about it, but it was fairly classic. She had the grays, two little grays on one side, but on her right side was sort of a tall, almost angelic figure, kind of a female presence trying to calm her. And that's something that comes out of folklore as well. The fairy queen, the tall, or even in some of the gray reports, the tall gray and the short grays, the one in charge sort of. So there's that there too. So no matter what you do, it seems like there are these patterns that keep showing up. And I think we should pay attention to them. When we analyze these things and put them together, just one last point on that. I've had, while I haven't done a lot of, work in the field and interviewed a lot of people like Rosemary Ellen Guiley certainly did, and Stan Gordon still does. They both told me that they would talk to people sometimes that had a Bigfoot experience. And they would say, oh, you know what? I saw this strange light in the sky. But
Mhm.
the Bigfoot
Right.
researcher said, I don't want to hear about your UFO. I want to hear about the Bigfoot, and vice versa. People that would say, that wanted to know about the UFO or the creatures from Alpha Centauri, I don't care about your Bigfoot sighting, but they wouldn't look at the whole spectrum and put them together. So I think it's just very important to listen to what people say they experience, and of course we have to try to assess credibility as well.
Hey, Steve, I want to talk to you one-on-one in person one time in private and tell you more about me that I don't tell. I mean, Dave
Okay.
knows a lot, but I do want to tell you, and I see what you're saying. There's a correlation with all of this. The people that get the ghost encounters, the people that have UFO encounters, they're also the same people that are very susceptible to all the other paranormal out there. And I mean, there's something we're missing. There's something we don't understand about it. I really, truly believe that. But there is a total correlation with all of it.
Yeah, John Keel believed that certain people were tuned in. He called another kind of a literary device he used was the super spectrum, that you had the regular light spectrum and so forth, but he thought there was to kind of indicate that which is beyond what we can see or sense. He used that as in his book The Eighth Tower is kind of a hypothesis, and he actually was one of the first ones to recognize that certain people would have one experience after another. And there was a time period when people like Dr. Hynek and who was his colleague, Ted Phillips, they didn't believe that when people told them that they had several experiences, they would reject them. They thought, well, that's not possible. But then they came to realize that, well, that is possible, and that is actually more the norm than anything else. I've got another. If you want to hear it, I was able to interview on my show Alan Godfrey.
Yeah, yes, we want to hear it.
Okay, Alan Godfrey.
Are these?
Yes, go ahead. Did you want to say something, Chad?
No, I said we want to hear it.
Oh, okay. Excuse me. Alan Godfrey was a police officer in Todmorden, England, and he had a classic abduction experience in 1980. And this is another one that goes off if you follow the patterns. He was called out because some cattle were in an area where they shouldn't have been. They were it was like a locked-in gate or whatever. And this one woman they called, and at first they thought it was a joke. So he goes out there, and the woman told him, said, "Look, I might be 80, but I'm not crazy." And she saw these cattle. So that was his reason for going out there. And that's going to come up later. So then he sees, yes. And then he sees a classic UFO over the road. And it's almost time for him to get off. And so he sees it. He doesn't really remember much about it. And then he goes back to the police station. And he finds out later, he puts two and two together, he's missing about a half hour. So he doesn't know what happened. So he goes and a few months later, he sets up the regressive hypnosis situation. And it's kind of a classic abduction case. He doesn't remember how he got into the craft, but it's got the little guys, kind of like the ugly little grays. He didn't even want to look at them. He thought they were so ugly. There's the tall individual, more human looking, called himself Yosef, not Joseph, but Yosef, kind of like something biblical. He's wearing these white robes and they're having a conversation and so forth. And here's one of the weird parts. So Alan Godfrey, and by the way, this guy is one of the most credible people I've ever talked to. And Jenny Randalls, who's a great British researcher, she's the one that originally investigated his case. And there's a lot more I could tell you, but he's just such a quality person, and the way he conducted himself as a police officer and how he would go the extra mile for people was just phenomenal. but he's under hypnosis and he's describing what's going on. And all of a sudden, he pauses and he says, "There's a bloody dog in here, and it's hideous looking." He saw inside what's supposed to be an alien craft something that looks like a large black dog. What the heck's a large black dog doing in a UFO? Well, the folklore of Britain, the black spectral dog that haunts the moors and the old castles. Perhaps there's a connection there. I don't know, but it's just like some researchers might just completely ignore that because it doesn't fit. Well, here's something else interesting. That day, when he went back with his partner, they did find these cattle, these displaced cattle, in this. They had somehow they would have gotten across this little stream, and behind a locked gate. It just didn't make any sense. Well, are you guys familiar at all with the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah? All the strange goings on there. Robert Bigelow bought it from the Shermans, and there was the book, The Hunt for the Skinwalker, and so forth. A three-ring circus of the paranormal, UFOs, animal mutilations, weird haunting phenomena, disembodied voices, everything.
Alien activity.
Yes, very, very, just crazy. Well, they had a situation where they were the Shermans. This is before they did sell the ranch, but he was still there as a caretaker, and they were just at their wits' end, and they had been checking the fence at one end, and they were driving back to where they had these 4 or 5 classic Angus bulls, and because they were high-end cattle ranchers, and Mrs. Sherman said, I don't know what I'll do if anything happens to those bulls. Well, they get back, and the bulls are not in the pen. They're gone, and they're frantic. They're looking all over the place, trying to find tracks. What the hell happened? The gates locked.
Are they breeding bulls then?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And so Sherman looks, and there's this old white trailer that hasn't been used, and he hears something. He looks inside. The bulls are they're alive, but they're all crammed together in this thing, and they're in kind of a stupor. And he starts banging on the door. They start coming out of it. They realize they're in a cramped space, and they just completely destroyed it. And it took them about 4 hours to corral these bulls again. So what the heck is happening? In another situation of displaced cattle. Let me give you one other one. There's a whole series of bizarre events that happen.
After you do that, I want to give you one.
Okay, good. Dove in Wales, 1977. And there's strange stuff that went on into the early 80s in Wales, just bizarre stuff. Another high strangest area, tall, 7-foot, silver-suited humanoids, bizarre lights, UFOs, just everything. Well, there was the Coombs, Billy and Pauline Coombs, at the Ripperston Farm. They were cattle ranchers, not high-end, just regular cattle ranchers. And one night, they had their 100 cattle in a corral, and they've got the dead bolt, and they also had it strapped so that the cows couldn't accidentally move the bolt. Next morning, they wake up, the cows are gone, and they find them 1.5 miles away at the Broadmoor farm, or in that area. And they think, what the heck? Did somebody play a prank? Well, if they did, and they let all these, that's, a pretty energetic prank. You could move 100 cattle. It would have to go right by the house where they were sleeping. So, okay, maybe somebody did play a prank. And then a few days later, Billy Coombs he's taken 16 of the cows, put them in a separate pen because he's going to get them ready to milk. So he goes inside, turns on the milking machine, turns back around, and the 16 cows are gone. They end up a mile, or maybe it was a 1/2 mile away at the Broadmoor farm again. So again, you get these bizarre cases of fortunately not mutilated, as we've heard so many times, but they're displaced, they're moved. So we have the thing in Wales, we have the Skinwalker Ranch, and we have the weird cattle displaced with Alan Godfrey. So what does it mean? I don't know.
Okay. I have no clue either, but I'm going to tell you a story about a friend of ours that kind of fits into what you just discussed. His name's Robert Kreider. He's a legitimate researcher and a good friend of mine. On one of his investigations to a report, there was an issue with animals. And the Bigfoot, typically what we believe in Bigfoot is they don't want themselves known. So they do what they do. They sneak what they can sneak. They don't come and they kill your livestock. That's typically not them. Now it happens. Now in this situation, goats were killed. And with the goats killed, their femoral artery it appeared to be penetrated by a large stick, along with the neck artery, the whatever. What's the one in the neck?
I'm not sure.
Okay, the neck artery and the
right.
and the carotid, the artery in the leg. Okay, it was penetrated on the inside on the leg, right through the artery. It was the jugular. It was penetrated in the jugular. Okay, there was no real blood left at all. The basic thing was the blood was drained. So you would suspect that if an animal was going to drain the blood and drink the blood, or two animals were, they're going to keep the animal alive. They're going to break its neck so that its heart keeps beating, so that it keeps pumping the blood. It's believed it's a sodium thing, an iron thing for vitamins and minerals. But the fact that this happened, and who's to necessarily say that Bigfoot did it? We don't know what did it, but it's in an area that they research Bigfoot. What do you think about this? I mean,
well, the whole animal mutilation thing and the blood draining has been something that I've just been baffled by. A lot of people have tried to suggest, and they've sent black helicopters in the area. If the military, if the government is doing some kind of research, why don't they just have their own farm and raise cattle and do whatever experiments they want on them? On the other hand, there was speaking of the Skinwalker Ranch, there was a really bizarre case where a mother had just birthed a newborn calf, and it was daylight, and they were doing some work nearby. The calf and the mother were just over the rise. All of a sudden, the Sherman's dog alerted and took off, and it was never seen again. And they went over the rise, and here's the calf.
Wait, you're saying the dog was never seen again?
Right. Their dog, the pet,
took off, and then
right. You've heard how animals will react to certain types of phenomena. Well, this one never came back.
Jumping off that bridge in Japan.
I hadn't heard about that.
There's a bridge in Japan where dogs will just commit suicide and jump to their death for no reason.
Yeah. But
look that one up. Look that one up, Steve.
Okay,
man. It's a real thing.
But it's like the rib. As I recall, the rib cage was sort of like completely opened up, and it was drained. I mean, this would have happened. It would have had to happen in a very short period of time, and then it was the next night, I think, where they tracked a couple strange animals. It was in the dark. Sherman was there. Colin Kelleher, one of the scientists that Bigelow set up within the NIDS team, the National Institute for Discovery Science. And they saw the eyes of this thing up in the tree. And Sherman took a couple of shots at it. And he was sure he he hit it, and it hit the ground, but all they found was one footprint. And it was kind of a round footprint with it looked like a couple claws on it. But there also seemed to be something else there. They were seeing these large, kind of ugly black dogs there, and also these oversized wolves when they first got there. So they were trying. They were sure, or Sherman was sure, they were tracking two animals in the dark, but there was virtually no, nothing left of them.
What year was this?
Those were the 90s, early mid 90s, I think.
Okay, what about the whole theory of Hitler and his geneticists and the things that people don't even know, that they wouldn't even tell us if they knew? Our government wouldn't tell us. What if Hitler really did create these creatures, some creatures?
Possibly, but then you wonder why the elusiveness. If they did create some kind of travesty, and that technology, that science still exists, why is it that these things are so elusive and we only have the one footprint? And they also found there was a cow that was underneath this tree that looked like it had been separated from the herd, and it was in kind of a stupor, so to speak, almost as if these things were hunting it or whatever. But they never got a clear view of what they were looking at. So, I don't believe that they just fabricated all this, but it was some of this. The disturbing thing is that some of this is so elusive and ethereal. So it's just very hard to get a grip on what we're talking about.
Why don't we just call it what it is? It's called intelligence. They have a intelligence, and if they're genetically crossed with human intelligence and they have animal instincts, they could easily survive.
Well, there is certainly some kind of intelligence behind this, even though it may be on a wavelength that we can't even begin to fathom. I mean, it does seem to be orchestrated. I mean, even the movement of some of the strange lights and the orbs. The thing that was so frustrating to the NIDS team was they were trying to approach this through the scientific method, but they chronicled something like, I think it was about 200 separate types of paranormal incidents, and they weren't repeated. So how do you how do you quantify anything like that? We get a lot of data, and you get a lot of weird stuff happening, and you document it. But they had that situation where those cameras they had overlooking a particular area all went out at once. And they found out the wires were ripped apart as if some kind of force ripped them apart. But there was one camera that was still around that didn't see anything attack the wires. I mean, they could see the other camera's red lights go out all at the same time, but that was it. It's very, there's sort of a trickster aspect to some of this. The classic.
Is this demonic, Steve?
Well, I don't know if it's demonic. I'm a little bit hesitant to call it that. However, a lot of this phenomena, I think, has given rise, at the very least, has given rise to the belief in a demonic force. It may not actually be demonic. It may be, maybe they're monsters from the id. We talked about the tulpa a little bit earlier and creating thought forms. Did you guys ever see Forbidden Planet? The classic 1950s science fiction film with Leslie Nielsen. They land on the planet, and they find Walter Pigeon.
What in Mars? They land on Mars?
No. It's another planet in some other star system, and it's a very, very well done 1950s science fiction flick. And they find the Krell race is there, but they're extinct, but they left this advanced civilization behind. And they don't know why they died. And they find out what happened was they had a means of creating matter out of thoughts. And they could create images. They could create creatures or whatever. But what happened was they created unknowingly monsters from the subconscious, monsters from the id, from the dark side of human consciousness, and that apparently, according to the script, is what killed them. And the good guys almost die because of that same thing toward the end of the movie. But goodness prevails. But it was that idea of the dark side of human consciousness creating some of these things. Well, that's not demonic necessarily, but it could be, I mean, on a broader scale, that could give rise to some of these things. Now, I'm not suggesting that we're dealing with monsters from the id, but there does seem to be a component that is connected somehow to human consciousness with all this. There's some kind of an interface there. And I don't really know how to explain it or understand
Do
it.
you think we create some of this stuff, Steve?
I think we do.
We have a
Possibly.
powerful brain. We really do. Do you think that it's possible when I go out the woods that I create that Bigfoot comes because I'm thinking about it?
Well, I'm not sure that I think that probably there are elements or there's some kind of something that's already there, but perhaps you are tuned in to where you could draw the experience to you. And I kind of think that you don't simply, create a hairy thought form all by yourself that manifests and then leaves footprints behind and hair samples and so forth. But however, there are people that firmly believe that if you go out and look for Bigfoot with a certain state of mind, you'll never find it. There are other people that believe with an open state of mind, that you will actually have that experience or draw it to you. And I think there may be a lot to that.
Do you think that it might be the case that you have a convergence of a person being an experiencer plus a location plus certain energy that is present at that location? They all come together and create an anomalous kind of experience?
Yeah, I think that may be. Now, people, the one area that I haven't done a lot of research in is there are those that look at the geography, quartz, certain kinds of elements in the area that seem to perhaps
Right.
be, conducive to some of these things. So, yeah, I think that perhaps that certain areas give maybe help the energy flow or exacerbate some of these experiences. Sure, and it would be be very, it's an interesting area to pursue because that might yield more results for us. But there does seem to be something to the frame of mind of the individual. On the other hand, you can say that there are people that don't believe in any of this and aren't really open to it, and they have, they can have a pretty classic experience that will change their mind.
I certainly think that there's the one.
But
Go ahead.
Dave,
you're lagging. Keep going, Steve, man.
Okay. I was okay. I thought I might be interrupting somebody. But let me give you another weird. Okay, I know I'm going all over the place, but we were talking about the Mothman and the Dogman and so forth.
Yes.
Okay, John Keel. Now, okay. Well, let me move back a bit. There's a gentleman named Dr. Chuck Lietzau, who a retired professor at Wayne State. I heard him speak at the Michigan MUFON meeting one time, and he was doing research into Bigfoot and
Yes,
UFOs in Michigan.
You could have the same argument.
Just keep
that
talking.
Person, although they had not had an experience,
he's
before,
like 2 minutes behind us.
And I keep hearing somebody's breaking up there. I think we're having technology is striking again.
Yeah. Come on, Dave. Dave.
Want me to continue?
Continue. Yes.
Okay. So he was one of the things he said was some of his findings were pretty out there, kind of in the vein of Jacques Lapseritis, who wrote the book Psychic Sasquatch and the Sasquatch People. But one thing he said kind of stuck in my mind, and he said, we keep finding these large dog-like footprints in these hot spots. And I thought, where have I heard that before? Well, John Keel in the Mothman Prophecies, when he's talking about where the Mothman was sighted by the Old North Power Plant, and he talks about these kind of weird-looking footprints that might have been the Mothman's or whatever. But he also mentioned that he was finding these large. This is way before Linda Godfrey started talking about the Dogman. He was finding these large dog-like footprints in the vicinity of the North Power Plant, and they were. He said whatever made them were, it was like 300 or 400 pounds. They had to be really heavy. I'm pretty sure Mothman doesn't have big floppy dog feet. So then he mentioned that his colleague Ivan Sanderson, and of course. Ivan Sanderson was the guy that wrote years ago the Abominable Snowman Legend Come to Life, and he wrote some great books on UFOs. He said he told Keel that yes, we keep finding these dog-like footprints in these hot spots, but we don't have any more information than that. It was just kind of a couple lines in the book. I wish I knew more. So I consulted with Linda Godfrey, and I said, Linda, is this the case? Do people are there people finding these dogman-like footprints, even though they may not see the dogman, in some of the hot spots you've investigated? And she said yes. So I just found it interesting that you have 4 researchers separated by half a century, all telling us that we keep seeing these large dog-like footprints in the hot spots. And it's like and what else could make them besides what we've been calling the dogman? But it's interesting that it's only been in recent years since the Dogman has sort of surfaced.
70s, 60s, late
right.
60s.
But the thing is, if you've ever listened to, I think Vic Cundiff was it Dogman Encounters Radio?
Yep.
People have felt comfortable now to come forward and talk about the experience they had years ago. I think that it was crazy enough to talk about your Bigfoot report, but almost acceptable now. But back in, if you were to see a large dog-like canid standing on 2 legs, maybe that was a little more than you wanted to tell anybody about. But it's just interesting that, again, another weird pattern with these dog-like footprints keep showing up in these different areas that are sometimes associated with other types of phenomena. And again, I wonder, what does it mean? It's almost like, I mentioned Dr. Donald Orman, the guy that wanted to exorcise Nessie. And apparently it didn't work anyway, because Nessie still is steaming back and forth every once in a while. But I love his term. He called it the phantom menagerie. And it does seem like it's kind of a phantom menagerie sometimes. But on the other hand...
Come on, Steve. Isn't it all phantom menagerie?
Well,
we try to put Bigfoot stuff out there, but it still always gets discredited. Everything does. Everything is power of suggestion.
Well, but there is that aspect, that where there's a certain physicality to much of this that can't be ignored, and that's where the paradox comes in. With UFOs, and I've wondered if it seems to me that there's an aspect of human consciousness that is reflective, and that perhaps we do generate certain archetypes or whatever, and perhaps they're apparitions, perhaps they're paraphysical and even leave physical evidence sometimes. But then there does seem to be an aspect where there are certainly some other intelligence that interacts with us. What if, and this is way out on a limb, what if this alien presence, wherever it comes from, another dimension, another planet, what if they are aware of this aspect in human consciousness and can manipulate it? And you know what I mean? They can. They realize that we project certain images just as a species, and that perhaps they can manipulate it or use it to sort of mask their activities, or even to make us see certain things. If that's the case,
what if
what's that?
what if they created us? What if we are nothing? I mean, I know this is getting deep.
Yeah.
Okay, what if we are nothing more than a science project?
Well, that would bum me out to no end, Chad. Who knows? I guess
Listen, it's just too weird. Come on, think about it, Steve. The way the whole world runs, the way I have my psychic abilities and other people's do, and some people don't.
and
The
I
way
don't.
everything happens.
Well,
Dude, there's
go ahead.
something more. There's something more than just.
Yeah, but I would say that perhaps maybe someone could, the Anunnaki or whatever, could create the vessel, but I don't believe that they could create the soul or that divine spark. That I don't believe. I don't think that any other entity has done that. But I can't. I don't have any documentation. Let me put it that way.
I appreciate that. I agree with you too.
And again, there's certain things that we admit. There's certain. I think there's certain answers that we kind of gravitate to that we might like some of these things to be, but it doesn't mean that that's going to be right, and we have to kind of step back.
And we have the tendency to take the easiest answer. It's a human nature. Oh, the easiest answer.
Right. And if we hear a report that has elements in it that we don't like, it's like, we got to be careful, because those elements we don't like may be a key to really unraveling or understanding something.
Well, we just got bailed on. You know that, right, Steve?
You just got what?
We got bailed on. It's just you and me, man.
Okay. Well, did everybody go to bed, or did technology fail?
No, the chat's still running. So
okay, that's cool.
Went to bed.
I know that almost every time I start my show, we usually use Skype, at least for my show. We always have some kind of a glitch, but Zoom seems to work a little better. But yeah,
Dude,
and
StreamYard seems so fast, and it's not perfect. Don't get me wrong.
Well, certain people seem to interfere with electronics, and it's funny. I had the privilege of being on Tim Beckley's show a few years ago with Nick Redfern, and he was talking about one of his Men in Black books. Well, he said that oftentimes when he's talking about certain subjects, the Men in Black or the black-eyed children, that electronics go haywire. The show quit. I talked to a lady who had a series of experiences, Marnie Kirby, who's been a guest and a co-host on my show, and we lost connection. And there's another lady, Sherilyn Carter. There's certain people where they seem to interfere with electronics, and so sometimes you have to pick it up again and do some editing.
My friend and mentor gets none of my text messages.
No. That's bizarre. Well, maybe I can be happy that I'm not much of an experiencer, so I probably don't send out much in the way of electronic interference or whatever.
Well, maybe electronic interference helps at times too. So
it might. If it could help me with a slot machine, perhaps, get the vibe, that might work.
I'm gonna get with you, and I want to talk to you in private and give you stuff in private.
All right.
Don't want to do it here. But heck, man, we've been hour and 45 minutes.
Oh, how about
I
that?
don't know.
Okay.
If you got something to say it.
No, I think I appreciate you guys having me on the show. And
I think Blake's coming in. Blake, you coming in?
Okay.
Oh, here's
Here comes
Dave.
Dave, I think.
Dude, it was great having you, man.
I appreciate it. I know I was all over the place, but I guess this field is all over the place. The only other thing I didn't mention was that you're familiar with Seth Breedlove of Small Town Monsters. He's done a lot of great DVDs.
Monsters, isn't that what's his name?
Yeah, Seth Breedlove.
Yeah, but him and there's another guy.
He's got a whole team of people with him. But a few years ago, he did a DVD called The Mothman of Point Pleasant. And more recently, he did the sequel called The Mothman Legacy, which is really well done. I happen to be one of the talking heads in it. So you'll get to see my handsome countenance if you stay with it long enough.
God, you got to be kidding me. We're that fortunate.
That's right. It was great to be with a quality production. So they did a really nice job.
Oh, thank you for the compliment. We appreciate it. Dave, are you here?
Yes, I think Dave is here.
He is. Okay, Dave, finish this up, man. Hey, Dave, Steve, man. It's been fun talking to you, man.
Well, you too, Chad. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Okay, so are we...
No, Dave's going to finish up.
Okay, good. He's... looks promising because he's not frozen. He's moving, and that's good. So how long have you guys been doing
you can hear me, I cannot hear you.
Yes. Oh, you can't. Okay.
Hey, Steve, we've been doing this for about a year.
Okay.
I've been doing it for way longer, and so have all of us, but we've come together.
Okay.
For about a year, and we built our team. And obviously Dave's gone, but
yeah, he said he could.